it's time now, as always, to take a little break from our main conversation and delve into the off the grid segment. For those of you who are new to the talk show, this is my chance to ask some unconventional questions and see if we can learn a little bit more about Ed by approaching the interview from a different angle. So, Ed, based on all of your videos and our conversation thus far, you do seem to be a proper car enthusiast. However, you did run a supercar rental company. Now, based on my admittedly limited knowledge of the industry, supercar rental companies seem like a magnet for posers. Were you ever secretly annoyed when you had to hand over the keys to a customer adorned in a Burberry coat and whatever designer items they could find on clearance at the local Nordstrom rack?
Well, as a Nordstrom Rack shopper myself, I suppose I can relate in many ways to it. What I always loved was the chance to introduce the reality of a supercar to somebody who previously had only dreamt of it. And so, in a lot of ways, I loved those people because they were going to learn a lot in the day or week or whatever it was to follow that. And the same was true when they would walk into the dealership. I mean, at first, you want to qualify and make sure they're actually capable of making a buying decision. But once you know that they're really interested, especially in that window of time, 2009 to 2015, when I worked there, there was such an explosion of production of supercars that, you cannot be a proper car enthusiast, but you can absolutely love a Bentley GT Speed, a Maserati Gran Turismo, a California, a lot of these cars that have a lot of brand cachet, but that most enthusiasts think are a little bit too watered down. And so watching those kind of like gateway drugs into the world of cars, and some people would say, you know what, that's about as hardcore as anything I ever want. And some of them ended up in GT2 RSs before too terribly long. And so to me, our journey with respect to cars is something that should always be progressing. And it's irresponsible for any of us to think that we are going to enter that world with our opinions entirely valid, knowing everything we need to know about what makes us happy in a car, and being ready to make the right decision to buy the right car for us. And I still buy cars that were super cool when I was 20 years old. I can't help but love them. I have all of them pretty much now that anybody would have wanted, short of a Bugatti Veyron. And I love going into my garage and it looking like I won the lottery 10 or 15 years ago. And that works very well for me. It works very well as I have an allergy to depreciation, and I have to avoid, knowing that a car is going down in value just because I happen to love it enough to have paid for it. That just hasn't worked yet in my financial well-being or my personal life, but maybe one day. But I think that sure, there are cringy customers. There are people who don't embody what we want to as enthusiasts. But when we start looking at a world where we're selling more than $100,000 cars a year, we're going to have those. That's inevitable. And so I think, coexisting alongside them is one of those things that we have to figure out a way to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I've never really thought about like my affection for cars as something to progress, but when you talk about it like that, I do kind of see that to be true when I think about what I liked as a kid versus what I like now. Kind of like a little joke. Usually, whenever people ask me what's like your favorite car, what's the one car that you would give them, right? I have like a little 10 car list on my phone that I just give it to people, and it changes, like you said, right? When I first made it, it had a certain 10 cars that now I kind of think, dude, is that really good taste? Do I really want that? And of course, it's changed now. So very valid points.
So what's the list? Get it out.
What's the list get at? Okay, let's see. All right. So I call this my dream 10. Like, you said if you won the lottery 15 years ago. This is mine. Okay, so first one, Porsche 918 Spider. Second one, Bugatti Veyron Supersport, specifically the Supersport. McLaren F1, of course. Ferrari Enzo, I got to see one of those in Maranello, fell in love with it. Porsche 356 Speedster, Lexus LFA, I absolutely love that car. If I had to choose one, probably the LFA. Ferrari 599 GTO, again specifically the GTO. Aston Martin DB5, Jaguar Mark 1, and then the Land Rover Defender 90 Heritage Edition.
There you go.
Yeah. So
Good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there used to be like an Aventador, and again, I was like, is that maybe that's not car enthusiasty enough, and maybe that's a little bit too. That doesn't speak that hey, I like cars. You know, it seems a little bit too much, a little too flashy. I guess is how I would say. So I had to take that one off the list.
And you put a Veyron World Speed Record car or a Super Sport on there.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those cars. It's like a little unavoidable. You have to have it on your
You
list. You
gotta
know, you
have it.
have to.
Well, you agree.
All right. Well, through Car Trek, I learned that you are known as the shrewd negotiator. Negotiating has traditionally been a skill needed for purchasing and selling cars, and personally, it seems like quite good fun to me. However, many new apps and websites are slowly eradicating the need for tense negotiations in the car buying process. Does that make you a little sad?
Well, I don't do it on new cars, and that's the only time. I mean, now there are dealership models that are no haggle pricing, which only means that we have unqualified salespeople that we don't want to allow to haggle. And it's pretty valid. I mean, it makes sense from a business model. You pay people a lot less, you sell at slimmer margins, and you do well. So, that may be true. But in the cars that I buy, there's plenty of room for negotiation. And I use the term shrewd negotiation because, quite honestly, when I was describing a rapper that my wife bought a Ferrari from and a prostitute that I bought a Lamborghini from, I couldn't think of another facetious term for someone who was attempting to negotiate from a point of no leverage. And he was a shrewd negotiator in both contexts. And so that stuck a bit more than I expected it to. But I love the way that I buy cars, and it involves a ton of risk and focusing on cars you really know about, and assuming that sometimes they're going to break, and they do, but sometimes they don't, and you make a lot of money. And so I kind of honed it into something that works for me, and it would be terrible advice to anybody else, but when people ask, I have videos that I refer them to. I say, look, you shouldn't do any of it, but if you want to know how I do it, this is exactly how I do it.
Yeah. And since you brought up the Lamborghini that you bought from a prostitute, I was just watching the video today, actually, a car story. So that Lamborghini video is the reason you didn't get to buy a Ford GT, right?
That's what they said. So I got both the approval letter and the turn down letter in the second round of 4GT applications. And the approval letter came 2 weeks after the turn down letters. And so they always do that so that if you apply, but you don't get the turn down letter, you think there's hope. And then they approve some and they waitlist some. Well, after I got the turn down letter, I still got the approval one. And it turned out that they had sent the approval ones to the wrong list. It was like revision one of people we think might get one. And then there was a revision two, and I had fallen off in those revisions. And so apparently, because I bought a Lamborghini from a prostitute, they did not believe I would be a good Ford GT owner. And so I did not get one, which was a little bit upsetting. I thought it was a beautiful car, but certainly the most beautiful new car that I felt like anybody had made in a little while. Obviously, like everybody else, I wasn't crazy about it being a V6, but at that point, we already knew that the cars were worth 500 grand over sticker. I don't think that I would have flipped it because I didn't think they were going to go down in value at any point, and so owning it for exactly 2 years and a day or 20 years, I think I'd still do well enough in it. I do think I would have ended up selling it rather quickly because I don't fit, and it would have taken some considerable seat modification where I was really just sitting on some padding on the tub in order for me at 6'5" to fit. And my favorite thing to do in a car is take it on a big road trip, and you can't. I had Tim Burton,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
on the YouTube channel talking about it the other day, and he drove his 3,000 miles around the country, including to my house, and they were having to call an Uber to follow them to their hotel to carry their luggage. So they were like, "I'm just going to put this in your trunk, and then you follow me here," which every Uber driver justifiably thought was a bomb. And so it was a real pain. And so having this size thing behind the engine that gets 180 degrees was not an answer. So it would have been obviously I would have bought one given the chance. I don't know how I would afford it. I don't have 600 whatever $1,000 right now, but I would have figured out a loan to do it again. But I wasn't upset necessarily to not get one. I do really want an 812 VS. It looks like they're going to call it this week, the 812 Version Special. to do as a tribute to the Yates Gurney Daytona. But I don't know. I have no new car status with Ferrari, so I'm not sure that's in the cards either.
Well, talking about some of the cars you own, you have a reputation for buying cars with interesting backstories. We talked about the prostitute Lamborghini. You also bought Paris Hilton's old Mercedes McLaren SLR. Yeah, I could go on, but now these stories obviously make the cars much more fun to own. But have you ever made a purchase where you feel that the emotional connection isn't enough to outweigh the pain of maintaining and owning that car?
You know, I'm not sure. I trying to think if there was one that the only time I really got bit hard on one is I bought my wife a supercharged 2010 Range Rover Autobiography from a dealer who swore up and down that it didn't need timing chains, and it needed timing chains. And so I had about a $9,000 unplanned expenditure on that car, which is the most I've ever spent on a car that just broke. I think, yeah. So that was the only time. I mean, it was factored in that I knew that I'd be okay in the car if I had to spend, money on things that they're known to have happen. So, is one of those things that I got it cheap. I ended up paying what I probably could have bought a decent one for, but it had that sorted out. I don't know if there's been one that probably not. It's
Hmm.
always been worth it,
I
even
feel
with the
like if
pain.
you ask Freddie or Tavares, maybe they don't like maybe the Flood Gallardo had a lot of work that he needed on that one, right?
It did, but once it's sorted out, now the thing's super dependable.
Really?
And I love driving it. I've still got it, and I can't imagine anything that'd be cooler for. I think I own it for probably like 82, 83 grand right now, and it's awesome. I mean, it looks like $130,000 car. It's a stick. I mean, the check engine lights are on and the gas gauge doesn't work, but it's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't like perfect cars because I like not worrying about it at all. And if a friend wants to borrow them for the week, or if I just want to drive it to the moon and back, I can do that. And to me, that's a big part of feeling like you own the car. And if you have any constraints, if there's anything holding you back, then why buy it in the first place? Just have a model or a poster or something like that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Because personally, when I write about cars, I like to write about, or I guess in general, as car enthusiasts, we like to think of cars as somewhat human, right, personified. And if you listen to people like Jeremy Clarkson, right, they like to talk about a car that might be too perfect. That like the reason that he likes an Alfa Romeo is that they have some deficiencies, and just like any person would. And I kind of agree with that. So I really understand where you're coming from with you don't like a perfect car.
Yeah, it's boring.
Yeah,
We
it is
want we
boring.
want cars that have stories and we make stories with them. And so, you know, when we think about how, and the great thing about a bad history in a car is that it matters less and less every day. If a car was in an accident yesterday, we worry about it. If it was in it 20 years ago, ain't nobody care.